We are in week 3 of our teaching series, What the World Needs. And over the course of this series, this 8-week series, we're going to be looking at and talking about what is known as the fruits of the Spirit. And if you've never heard that term, that phrase before, or even you've been here every week, it's just a good reminder for us to look at the words of the Apostle Paul. And Paul is really credited with writing 2/3 of the New Testament. And the fruit of the Spirit comes from words that he said to the church in the ancient city of Galatia. And this is what Paul writes in Galatians chapter 5, beginning in verse 22. He says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love. Well, what is love? Well, Paul continues to tell us. Love is joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Now, one of the things I said week 1 that I'll just reiterate all throughout the series, it's critical for us to understand that the fruits of the Spirit that Paul talks about, this is the work of the Spirit of God in us. It's not what we do. Like, we can't produce more joy and peace and forbearance and kindness and goodness in our lives. The Spirit cultivates those things in our lives. Our job is to create a healthy environment for the fruit of the Spirit to grow. And so every week as we look at each of these attributes, we're not talking about how do we become more joy-filled. We're talking about what do we do in our lives that sets the stage for joy to be built and grown up in us. Today, though, we're talking about the third. So week 1, we talked about love and joy. Last week, we talked about peace. This morning, we're talking about forbearance, and to which most everyone says, what is forbearance? Maybe if you know what forbearance is, you're a much smarter person than I am. But essentially, what forbearance is patience. Matter of fact, the Greek word that is translated here as forbearance is found 14 times in the New Testament. This is the only place in the New Testament where that Greek word is translated as forbearance. The other 13 times we see it in the New Testament scriptures, it's always the word patience. Matter of fact, most Bible translations, when it comes to the fruit of the Spirit, choose the word patience. And so I understand that there's subtle nuance between forbearance and patience, but for the sake of our time together today and what the rest we're going to talk about, we're going to go with the word patience. We're going to talk about how do we cultivate the environment in our life for the Spirit of God to develop patience in us. But before we get into that, I have to ask you a question. Are you a patient person? Before you answer, maybe look to the person next to you and ask them if you're a patient person. Sometimes we need a different perspective for us to really understand, are we a patient person? Now, here's what I'll kind of give a disclaimer that hopefully lets a lot of us impatient people off the hook here for a second. Being patient is incredibly hard because we live in a culture that doesn't at all celebrate or promote patience. Like, we live in a culture where it's just go, 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 on to the next thing. Like, everything is available for us just at the click of a button or just right around the corner. And so when things don't come as easy or as simple, or when life slows down to slower than the pace that we expect, we can feel this impatience grow in us. And it just almost feels natural because, again, culture says, go fast. Go hard, keep yourself busy, everything will work out smoothly, just keep moving on to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. And so again, because of that, we as people can struggle with patience. Patience is a hard thing, and we see it sort of play out in multiple areas of our lives. And so, tell me if you can relate to any of these. Have you ever been at the grocery store? And you shop, you get all your groceries, and you come to the time of checkout, and right when you walk up to all the checkout places, you size up the lines to figure out which one is the shortest and is going to move the fastest. Can anyone relate to that? Okay, all right. But then you get in line, and immediately you benchmark yourself with everyone else so you can kind of assess if you chose the right line. And then every time the other line moves forward before you move forward, you feel a little bit of impatience, anxiety, tension rising. We have created our own problem here. Like, there's no race, there's no gold medal on the other side of the checkout stand. We've created our own problem, and yet, we sit in line. I do this to myself. I don't know why I do this every time I go to the grocery store, but I just get frustrated. I'm really, really bad at picking lines. Anyone else relate? There could be one person in this line, 27 people in that line. I'll pick this line, and then the machine will break. Like, guaranteed it happens. And when it happens, it tries my patience. Or how about this one? You make a doctor's appointment, and you show up at your doctor's office, and you're a good patient. And so you're there like 10 minutes before your appointment. You check in, you're sitting in the waiting room, and you're thinking, I am here on time. My appointment is now in 5 minutes. Then the doctor will see me. But your appointment passes, and you're in the waiting room for 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes. Start to get a little impatient, start to get a little frustrated. Finally, someone comes out, calls your name. You get to go back, you feel just a momentary relief because you're like, finally, I'm back in the exam room, I'm good. You get into the exam room, they do all the vitals test, sign stuff, and you sit there and 5 minutes goes by, 10 minutes goes by, and you're like, look, I had to be on time. Like, why can't the doctor be on time? Like, our patience goes right out the window. Like, it doesn't seem to matter, like, to us that the doctor's actually doing important things with other patients. They're not just sitting back there and being like, I'll see if I can stretch this to 15 minutes. How about this one? You go to amusement parks, and you get there, you rush to get to the amusement park, the gates open, and then pretty much the rest of the day, you stand around and wait. You stand and you wait in a line, and then you rush to the next ride to stand around and wait in a line. My wife likes to call this hurry up and wait. That's what her expression of choice is for amusement parks. And like, you're just like constantly all day, you're just like frazzled because you're like, I got to run to the next thing, and I just got to wait. I got to wait. And time is money, and time's ticking away, and you're like, I better get like 6 rides in, or every ride's going to be like $75 a ride. And so like, let's get this going. Honestly, it's one of the reasons my wife hates Disneyland. Now, I say that realizing that half of the room will never want to talk to my wife again because she hates Disneyland. And then the other half of the room will have profound respect for her for being able to say what they are too afraid to say. But we have all these places in our lives where we can feel our patience being tried. And for those of us as Christians, like, it's almost comical, but sometimes we cry out like, Lord, give me patience. Like, I said, in like wherever it is, wherever you feel your patience being tested, like, Lord, give me patience. And then what do we say after that? And give it to me right now. Lord, I need your patience, and I need it right now. Like, right now. Like, we show our impatience in that very moment. Now, here's what's probably surprising to a lot of people. God actually wants to give you patience. And we see that in Paul's words. Like, it is the fruit of the Spirit. He wants us to experience a patient-filled life because it's a reflection of Him. That God is a God of patience. And that can be really hard for us, especially depending upon kind of the view or the understanding that we have of God. Like, a lot of us maybe haven't been raised to see God as a patient God. Maybe we've come across stories in the scriptures where we look at it and we're like, God, like, this is not, you're not being patient here with people, or patient with what's going on in the circumstances. On the contrary, at times it feels like God is something else. He's angry, he's vindictive, he's harsh, he's reactionary, and that can begin to paint a picture or a view that we have of God. Now, here's what I think is important for us to understand, and it doesn't just apply to God or the Bible. Whenever we take a snapshot, back in the days, like, you take a picture and the Polaroid thing would come out, you'd have like the snapshot. It is a still frame of a person's life. And so what we do is, like, we take a snapshot of God. Like, we take a story or we hear something about God, and there's this snapshot, and we look at that and we say, okay, well, this is who God is. But the truth is, no snapshot fully defines who any of us are, let alone God. To fully understand who a person is, to fully understand who God is, we have to move beyond the snapshot. We have to sort of pull back, look at the big picture of a person to get the idea of who they are. And when you zoom out when it comes to God, you get this truer, fuller picture of God as this patient, loving creator that has not just only started the world and us, but then walks with us every step of the journey. And you see it again and again and again in Scriptures. Matter of fact, there's a great passage that helps us understand some of this broader view of God that is found in the New Testament in a letter that Peter, who's one of Jesus' closest friends, wrote. This is what Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 3. He says, "The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise," as some understand slowness. "Instead, he is" what? He is patient. "He is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance." Like here is these words that Peter paints of God being this patient God who wants to create an opportunity and space for everyone to come to this place of repentance. For everyone to find and follow Jesus so that they not just have this life, but their eternity is also secure. God is sitting back, waiting for us as people to process life and process what he means to us in our lives. And this view of God as this angry, vindictive God doesn't align with this, because at any point with that view, we could be like, well, God just cuts it off. God is just, he's just done with people. But here we see Peter paints this beautiful picture of a God who is incredibly patient with broken, sinful people, just like me, who mess up again and again and again. Now, I recognize as I say that, you might be thinking, well, Mike, isn't that just a snapshot? Like, isn't that like you're just taking one verse out of the New Testament to paint this picture of a patient God? And isn't it true that God in the Old Testament and God in the New Testament seem like completely different gods at times, or at least they seem like they have different empathy and connection with their people? Well, let me see an example of the Old Testament where God shows his patience. And we often don't think about it, but one of the most beautiful examples of God's patience that we see in the Old Testament is found in the very first book, in the book of Genesis. Right at the beginning, there's the creation account that is found in Genesis 1 and 2. And then Genesis 3, we're told that there is an opportunity for Adam and Eve to choose their way over God's way, to choose what they want and desire over what God has told them is acceptable. And they don't just do this on their own. We know, if you're familiar with the text, that they're tempted by the serpent. They're tempted by Satan to eat of the tree with the tree of knowledge. And Satan kind of deceives them to do that. But Adam and Eve, they eat from this tree, and when they do, sin enters into humanity. And when sin enters into humanity, the relationship between God and his people are broken. Now, as you walk through this account here in Genesis 3, very quickly, when sin enters the world, when the relationship with God is broken, right away, Adam and Eve both are just filled with fear. They're filled with shame. They recognize in themselves their own nakedness, and everything even changes for them and their demeanor and their disposition and their outlook on life and even their relationship with one another. And we're told right here at this kind of juncture, God kind of steps into this scene. And when God steps into the scene, the first thing that Adam and Eve do is they hide. They hide from God. Again, it's the byproduct of their shame. It's the result of sin in their life. And when God gets there, he knows what's happening. He knows what has happened. And when God starts to talk, the first thing he does is he actually talks to the serpent. He tells the serpent that because of his actions, because of what he has done, there will be some consequences. There will be something that has to change because of what the serpent has done. But he doesn't just stop with the serpent. He doesn't just curse the serpent. After he curses the serpent, God then proceeds to curse Adam and Eve. And we read that and we think, okay, see, this is a perfect example. Like God just immediately, he curses Adam and Eve. Like Adam and Eve, they messed up. No doubt. They messed up. They did what they shouldn't have done. But God, where is your patience? God, where is your love? Why are you so harsh with them in this moment? We all make mistakes. We all fall short of the glory of God. Why are you so harsh with Adam and Eve? Again, God's not a patient God. And we can get so fixated on that we miss what God does next. Like I've read so many times the creation account in Genesis, and it was like probably the 50th time in that this very clear just representation of the heart and the character of God finally came to light with me. We read about it in Genesis 3, verse 21. So again, Adam and Eve, they chose their way over God's. Sin entered the world. They were filled with shame. They recognized their nakedness. Relationship was broken with God. God has cursed them. There's something that has to change. There's a consequence to an action. But notice what God does next. Verse 21. Then the Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife Eve and clothed them. This is not a harsh response. This is not an angry action. This doesn't come from an impatient disposition. God chooses to clothe his people. For sure, like I mentioned, there will be consequences for their actions, but God never abandoned them. That he's patient with them. As a matter of fact, every chapter forward in the Bible is the story of God's patience being played out as his mission is being played out in the redemption of humanity. That God is walking with us, like Peter says, creating space and being patient so that everyone has the opportunity to turn to him. If you move beyond a snapshot, if you zoom out and dare to see the fullest picture of God, what you will see is a patient God. A God who desires for each of his followers to reflect that very attribute. Again, it's not just that God is patient, but God wants us to be patient people as well. And that happens when his fruit is produced in us, which brings us back to where we started. Well, then how do we go about it? How do we go about cultivating an environment for the fruit of patience to grow in our lives? And I just want to share maybe just a few thoughts with this, a few things that I think you could tangibly focus on that will put you in a place that the Spirit's work can happen in your life. And so the first thing I want us to talk about and to think about is how do we create a sustainable pace? Again, I mentioned we live in a society that's like go, 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 go as fast as you can, run as hard as you can. And so over time, that drive, it's not sustainable. It leads to calendars that is filled. It leads to lives that are empty. And so we have to look at it like, okay, how can we go about creating a sustainable pace in our life? And probably the best way for us to start is for you just to take a second and maybe just to think about your life. To think about the pace that you're running. Like, do you feel like right now, this season of life, that you're running a sustainable pace? Like this is something you can do for as long as you're around. Like, do you feel like this is a healthy and sustainable pace? And maybe here's a great test for that. If I said, hey, I would love to get coffee with you. Like, let's just get coffee together. It'd be fun just to sit down and connect, for me to get to hear more personally a little bit of your story and for me to share my heart with you. If I made that offer to you, which I'll just say, I'm making that offer. I would love to have coffee with you. We'll make this a real life illustration. If I make that offer and you look at your calendar and you think, I could squeeze you in like in October. Or I got some time around January, I think I can make that work. Or if you can drive 63 miles to my workplace, because some of you guys travel really far for work, I can slot you in for like 15 minutes. If you have trouble carving time out in your calendar for me or for other people in your life, it's a clear sign that you are not running at a sustainable pace. And here's why our pace is so important. The faster you move, the quicker you become impatient. When you are in a hurry, every delay is a problem. And every single problem tries your patience. Can anyone relate to that? I'm going to say that again. When you are in a hurry, every delay is a problem, and every problem tries your patience. And so when we're constantly going at an unsustainable pace, we're inevitably running up against delays, conflicts, things butt up against each other, and each of those problems tries our patience. There's a man that I deeply respect. He's a theologian, a writer, a scholar. Some of you might know him. Some of you have never heard his name before. But his name is Dallas Willard. And he was a professor at psychology, focused on Christian studies, spiritual development at the University of Southern California. And he tells a story one time. And he said that there was a young pastor that came to him right when he was starting his ministry and said, Dallas, what I need to know is, what must I do? What must a person do to maintain a healthy spiritual life? Now, that might seem like an odd question, but let me just put this out there. That's a question that all of us should be asking, not just a pastor. Like, we should be asking for those of us who are Christians. God, what do I need to do to maintain a healthy spiritual life? That should be the most pressing question that we have in our lives. And Dallas, he thought for a second. He's a very methodical man. He thought for a second, and this is how he responded. He said, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And the pastor was like, oh, that's good. That is so good. All right, he writes it down. He's like, all right, Dallas, what else you got for me? Like, what else is there? Like, okay, ruthlessly eliminate hurry from my life. What else? And Dallas said, that's it. Like, if you want to maintain a healthy spiritual life, get rid of hurry. Focus on your pace. And I don't think Dallas just said this. Like, I think he really meant it. And again, I'm going to share the story. It's only a snapshot of his life, but I think it's indicative of his heart. When I finished grad school, I was looking at doctoral study work. And I was thinking, do I want to go a doctoral ministry route? Do I want to go a PhD route? And at the time I mentioned, I deeply respect Dallas Willard. He was local. I was in Southern California. He was at SC. So I thought, like, I'm just going to email him. I'm going to email him and ask him some questions about their department. So I sent him an email. And that's not even his area. Like, he's not over admissions. And so I said, hey, Dr. Willard, here's some questions that I have for you. Just love any insight that you might have on it. And he responded back the same day. And he said, sometimes email communication can just not be as fruitful as other forms of communication. Here's my office times. Why don't you come down and we'll sit and have a conversation? And again, this is someone I deeply respect. I'm like, I'm there. Like, but he's writing books. He's around speaking about spiritual formation. He's teaching at SC. He's got 1,000 things going on. And here is just a nobody shooting him an email. And he says, let's sit down and have a conversation. And I think the only reason he could do that was because he understood this. He understood what it meant to walk out and live at a sustainable pace of life. You see, when we choose not to do that, we ultimately choose to live as if we don't have limits. Like, each and every one of us, whether we like to admit it or not, we have limits. We have a capacity. Like, there's only so much we can do. There's only so much we can produce. There's only so far and so hard that we can run before we begin to break down, before our life begins to fall apart. We have capacity. We have limits. But most of us live life like we don't have limits. We operate as if we're machines. Like, we just go on to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. And it might seem crazy, but this is how we run our lives. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Come on, come on, come on. Move, 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 move. We have to acknowledge that we have limits. We have to acknowledge that we're not a machine, but it's more than just what we acknowledge. We also have to be intentional about building or rebuilding our lives in such a way that creates margin for us to be able to pause, to reflect, to operate and walk out life at a sustainable pace. One of the things that I loved about COVID, and you're like, can you say that? Are you allowed to say you love COVID? I didn't say I love COVID. I said one of the things I love about COVID is the way almost instantaneously, like, the calendar was clear. Like everything I had was gone. Like doctor's appointments, gone. Fun things out, restaurants, gone. Like my calendar was suddenly free. And it was an odd thing. If you can reflect back, it felt really weird. Like our bodies almost had to like downshift to this place where we're like, okay, I don't have as much going on as I normally do. I don't have as many kids' sports to run around and take care of. Like, okay, this is different. And then quickly, this is different became, this is kind of nice. Like, I like this. I like this pace of life. And I said this, and I know so many other people who said the same thing. They said this: when COVID is over, I'm keeping this. Did you say that? Like when COVID's over, I'm going to continue. Like I don't want to get back to the way that life used to be, where it was just crazy busy all the time. And then we blinked, and we're all back to crazy busy lives. Like what we wanted went right out the window because, again, culture constantly pushes against this idea. Let's go, let's move. And so we just get caught up. So we have to be intentional about getting caught up with something else. Getting caught up in something more important. Because again, I just want to remind us, this series isn't just for us to experience patience for patience' sake. This isn't just about creating a sustainable pace so that you can have just a more enjoyable life. Like all of this is to create the environment for the Spirit of God to work in us. And so we're focusing on our pace to create the space for us to develop and deepen and build our relationship with our Savior. And so what do you need to do? And honestly, I'm going to give a suggestion, but it's probably going to look different for each of us. Like, what do you need to do to carve out time, to cancel things on your calendar, to say no to more things than you say yes to, so that you have the time to spend in your relationship with Jesus? Now, I've read a lot of books, and I've heard a lot of people talk on this. And every time they talk on it, about the best way to create a sustainable rhythm of life and how that looks and where it starts with, I groan inside because it's not me, but I'm going to share it with you anyways because I found it to be very fruitful in life. Which you read time and time again, and where you see with people who have really strong spiritual lives, who seem to have perspective, who seem to be able to walk at a sustainable pace, what they'll say is every single morning, I get up early, and I spend time with God. And I'm like, I am not a morning person. Can anyone else relate? Me and you. The early bird catches the worm, apparently. I'm not a morning person. I'm not, and some of you are not. And so like if I'm like, what do you need to do to start your day off right, to create spaces, you need to start in the morning with God. You're like, that doesn't work for me. Okay, if it doesn't work for you, then find something that does. But often the excuse of I'm not a morning person is really just the excuse of I don't spend time with God. Because when life starts, we're far too busy to find the time or the energy later on in the day. And maybe it's better. Maybe it's just better to become a morning person than it is to live life as an impatient person. No one likes to be impatient all the time. Maybe it's just better to force ourselves to become a morning person than to live life as an impatient person. And here's why mornings are important. It's not like there's something like magical about 5 a.m. that's different than 6 a.m. But here's at least the idea of why mornings are important. If you can spend the first part of your day focusing on God, if you can spend the first part of your day sitting with Him, having a moment with Him, being silent before Him, being alone with Him, it will help prepare you for whatever the day brings. And it will show through your actions that you prioritize what matters most. And because you put God first, you begin to look at the rest of your day differently. Because you put God first, you begin to recognize what really is most important. And often, what is most important isn't always what is most urgent. And with that perspective, you can begin to look at your calendar, look at your life, and look at your pace of life, and figure out a more sustainable way forward. The second thing I would say is this. it would be really helpful for us to develop a healthy perspective. Not just create a sustainable pace, but develop a healthy perspective. It is hard, and I'll just say this for me, because I don't want to speak for you, but it's hard for you too. It is hard for us to take responsibility for our own impatience. Like when we get impatient, you know what we do? We put blame on other people. Well, it's their fault. Well, they did this. They tried my patience. They're getting on my last nerve. Like, they're the reason why I'm responding and acting this way. Now, I'm not saying that other people don't affect you. Like other people and what they do, their actions, it affects me. It affects you. It affects all of us. It can lead to us becoming impatient. But blaming them, not they impact you, but blaming them isn't going to get you anywhere. It got Adam nowhere when he looked at God and said, it's Eve's fault. She's the one who did this. She's the one who put us in this place. And so what I want to encourage you to do, and this is part of this healthy perspective thing, instead of blaming other people, just pause, reflect and recognize who you are and who you're not. Like just pause and reflect for a moment and see where you come up short. And perhaps it's coming clean with who you really are. Perhaps it's recognizing the perspective to recognizing your own brokenness that will enable you to become more grace-filled with other people. We lash out on others because somehow, whether we say it or think it, we somehow believe we're above them. Like this person, how dare them do this to me? This has caused my impatience. I only feel this because I'm above them. But the healthy perspective is to realize our own brokenness, to realize our own mistakes and flaws. To elevate people above ourselves is what Jesus calls us to do. The Apostle Paul helps us understand this perspective in words that he wrote to Timothy. He says this in chapter 1 of 1 Timothy. He says, here's a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of who I am the worst. But for that very reason, I was shown mercy, so that in me, the worst of sinners, Christ Jesus might display his immense patience as an example for those who would believe in him and receive eternal life. And we read this and we're like, Paul, the worst of sinners? Paul, I think you're being a little harsh on yourself. I mean, surely, Paul, there is someone who is worse than you. But here's the thing. Paul is not looking for a scapegoat like many of us are. Many of us, as long as there's someone who's a worse sinner than us, we're okay. Like, we're good. Because so-and-so's worse, or look at that person, or at least I'm not as bad as this person. Like, Paul is not looking to scapegoat. He's not looking to blame someone else. Paul has a healthy perspective of who he is. Paul recognizes that he is a sinner. That's who he is. He also recognizes who he's not. He's not God. And as long as we think we're something more than we are, we will feel justified in blaming other people. As long as we think we're more important than we actually are, we'll struggle with patience. If you think about it, think about all the scenarios I said at the beginning. You're standing in the grocery store, you're waiting in line, and you look at everyone else and think, I'm sure what that person has is a lot more important than what I have going on. I'm sure where that person has to be is a lot more urgent than where I need to be. Suddenly, it's a lot more easy to allow the Spirit to work patience in your life in those moments. We are all sinners. We all fall short. We walk out our brokenness day after day. And understanding that is who we are helps us develop and live out grace for other people. You see, ultimately what Paul wants us to understand is that the fullness of God's grace and his immense patience is on display through our lives. The fullness of God's grace and his immense patience is on display in you and in me. Your patience reflects Jesus. To which some of us should think, whether you like it or not, your patience reflects Jesus. It reflects our God. And if we reflect our God, then we have an obligation. We have a responsibility to do what we need to do to cultivate the soil of our lives, to ensure that God can produce in us what is a reflection of him, because we walk around as little Christ. If you're a Christian, you walk around as a little Christ. When people look at you, they see Jesus. Whatever version that you put forward of you, they put on Jesus. Like, we have a responsibility, an obligation, an expectation to reflect Jesus in everything we do. Guys, Christians should be the most patient, loving, kind people in the world. We have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work that we need to do to cultivate the soil of our lives, to develop a sustainable pace, to create a healthy perspective. When we begin to do that, then it creates the environment for God to plant the seed of patience and for that fruit to grow and develop in our lives. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for your loving patience. And God, even though we understand that actions have consequences, I'm grateful for the fact that you constantly pursue us in our brokenness. God, you constantly are pursuing us for relationship. And God, I pray that as Christ followers, for those of us who consider ourselves followers of Christ, that we would commit day after day to look to you, to pursue you, to desire to be more and more like you. That we wouldn't be content with being better than someone else, but that we'd recognize the fullness of our brokenness and understand that it's only because of your grace that we are made whole. And God, I know that we desire to be patient people. We desire it because we feel the ramifications of our impatience. We feel the way it impacts not just us and others, God, but we also have a deep longing to reflect you, not just a version of you, but we want to reflect the real you. So God, help us focus on our pace. Be diligent about that. Help us focus on our perspective. Not allowing ourselves to lift up ourselves above others, but to realize our own brokenness, our own weakness, and the way that you have called us to humble ourselves and to serve others. God, mold us and shape us and grow your patience in us. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.